Welcome everybody to the big news roundup. Today I'm going to be talking about everything that occurred at Twitchcon 2015, the first Twitchcon. ArenaNet went all out on this convention to an extent I had no idea they would. When I first heard ArenaNet would be at Twitchcon, I thought it'd be some small little throwaway thing they'd do because, hey, we don't have a particularly big Twitch audience anyway, right? Well, no. They filled up hours and hours and hours and hours worth of interviews from the devs, exclusives, and I'm now even considering I regularly give you guys updates on how the game's development's going in a fairly unique position that I have about 10 hours worth of content from the devs to sum up to you all. Suffice it to say, I haven't caught every single one of the shows, but tonight after I've made this video, I'll be sitting down with a nice warm cup of tea, filling myself in on those, and as the week progresses, I'll catch you guys up on any additional details. But the vast majority of important things I want to sum up for you guys in today's video over multiple streams, so let's just cut straight into it. Now, I'll mention two of the biggest things that came out from TwitchCon, that being the in-game reveal of the Druid, including all of its traits, all of its skills, all of its functionality. That stream had its own video, which I already produced. I want some further discussion on that coming up soon, because I think a lot of people misunderstood me. I think the Druid is really cool, and I'm really looking forward to playing some dedicated healing support. I really like the idea of it. However, I'm still a little concerned that ArenaNet just haven't talked to us about why this stuff will genuinely have a place in the game going forward. There are so many basic and obvious things they could explain, like, for example, making water-filled blasts with healing power and so forth, that they just have neglected to mention. That makes me kind of sad. But we'll do some more discussion on that soon. And the other thing I've done a dedicated video on was, of course, the release trailer for Heart of Thorns. This was a little shorter than I was expecting, but kind of cool because ArenaNet went with kind of the Blizzard style, I suppose, painterly mix of CGI to try and impress those outside audiences. How well it did in that end, I'm not sure, but hey, it was a badass scene showing off Ritlock fighting against what appeared to perhaps be Morgemoth. It's actually been confirmed, though, in another one of their shows, which detailed the making of this trailer, that the end creature is not actually Morgemoth. So I should point that out to you guys. That is definitely not Morgemoth there. And there were some other little details I missed too, like at the start of the trailer, the roots are forming various looking body parts, a rib cage, an eye, and even a dragon's wing, it would seem. Definitely pushing this idea that Morgemoth is the collection of roots in general. And we have to find the sweet kernel, the heart of the thorns to destroy him. Alright, so let's get on with it. TwitchCon, the good, the bad, and the toaster. Let's start off by talking about the Precursor stream. This stream featured Ruby, Colin Johansson, Mike Z, talking about the way that Precursor crafting will work going forward. This was the one where Colin's voice was totally going. He'd clearly been talking way too much at the convention, and chat was spamming requests for him to get some water. But they gave us some real examples for the first time in a long time how Precursor crafting will work, and I'm really thrilled at what they've come out with. Long-time watchers of my channel will know that one of the things I'm most disappointed in with Guild Wars 2 is the incredible variety of cool areas around the world that just have no reason to go to, no incentive for characters to speak to NPCs, or feeling that, you know, a merchant in Garenhof has something specific and something unique for you, as opposed to any other random-ass merchant in the entire world. Precursor crafting is the big start to addressing that. There are a ton of existing legendary weapons. All of them will have long, three-tiered quest chains, essentially, told to us through collections and the achievement system, and buying things from vendors and crafting. Long chains of activities and things we have to go out on this long, what they're calling the legendary journey, that will have us traveling to all different areas of the world. So it starts with an NPC in Lion's Arch, where you can kind of buy your first tome. It is, of course, tied to the Central Tyria region mastery, so you'll need to max these out before you can get really deep into the Precursor crafting. But as you go deeper, you'll kind of be tasked with these big objectives. Now, Colossus is what they honed in on, and what they kind of showed mostly was a stage of building the Colossus, the hammer Precursor, where they kind of asked themselves the question, all right, so you've built this cool-looking weapon, but where does this chrome stuff come from? Where does that chromatic essence lie, and how would someone craft that? And they took the idea of oozes. So you have this whole huge task to first build a terrarium, to house the oozes. And much like how, as we trained Mordry up and we built this back piece and it felt like a real pet of ours, something we were feeding daily, unless you were buying the stuff off the trading post, you know, you were feeding and watching it grow week by week. It's a very similar situation here. So you build this box and then you actually go around the world gathering oozes, little blue oozes and green ooze, and putting them into this box, carrying these oozes around with you. And once you've got all of them, they kind of start to mix together in their essences, or you're going to start feeding them, and you start feeding them a huge variety of different items. Ooze booze, which already exists in the game, you feed it some of that, see what happens. You feed it a growth tonic from the ogres in the Blaze Ridge Steppes. And of course, to get that growth tonic, you have to help those ogres out in that crawl. Existing content, but it's a reason to go do it. So you're going to help them out, and eventually you'll get the vendor will become available to you. You'll buy it, you drop that in the box, and slowly you kind of brew this ultimate ooze in its terrarium. And then once you've got that, there's this whole section where you're testing it out, and you're subjecting it to taking agony damage, or you're dipping it into the lava pool in Mount Maelstrom. It feels a lot like all my favorite stuff about the Mordry collection, all my favorite stuff back in GW1 about the Black Moa Egg Chick Hunt, for those of you who remember that, all bundled into just one stage of one precursor, and there are a ton coming out with Heart of Thorns. I can absolutely see now why there's not a full set of legendaries being released with this expansion, and even though more love seems to have been given to the old precursors, I don't even mind that much. This is plenty of stuff. I may even see myself doing these collections for legendaries I already own. I've always wanted a second incinerator, for example, to get my twice told legend and to kind of finish off both daggers, and I'll probably go doing that with the pre. Some other little things to take note of here, though, and I've mentioned this every time that precursors have come up, and that is the fact that, yes, we'll be able to craft our own, but this isn't going to be cheap necessarily. A lot of the things you have to buy from NPCs, they cost gold, and it costs a lot of time, and it's a lot of effort, and it is still pricey. And it has to be pricey so that the existing precursor economy for the ones you can actually sell, which they're moving away from now on, but since they're there, they want to value that, they want to have that, hold that value. I think that's really important. You don't want to devalue the ultimate legendary in the end. You don't want to devalue existing precursors. And the point has always been, guys, this isn't a way to get an easy precursor. This is a way to get a non-RNG precursor that isn't to do with a trading post. That's what this is. Expect to still put in a lot of effort, and it costs a lot of money. I know the QQ is going to come in after launch where people realize, oh, I actually still have to put in effort for the precursors, but I don't mind. I think that this is going to be a lot more fun, and you can actually measure and make measured progress. If you're trying to get your own precursor and you're doing it through the Mystic Forge, you waste 300 gold on the Forge one night. What do you come out with? You don't actually feel like you're a step closer to the precursor because it's just pure RNG. It's different this time. You spend that 300 gold, you complete the activities, and you know you genuinely are those tangible steps closer to getting your legendary. And the fact that each precursor collection and tier and area of crafting is so specifically targeted at your end resulting weapon is really cool. Also, do note they did reveal Spiritwood planks are available for crafting this stuff, and immediately all of them were bought off the TP. So be aware of the Ascended Materials markets and all that kind of stuff, because the market's going to change quite a lot when Hearthorns comes out. Last of all, and Arena gets some real kudos here, Colin did talk on this stream about that infamous blog post from, how long ago was it now, 2.5 years ago, where they kind of outlined what they wanted to do in 2014. And what they did in this blog post was they said, we're going to add this, 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 and this. Most of it was added. But they did say precursor crafting was coming way back then to 2014, and it never did in the end. And Colin really talked very candidly again. I think he's really getting this bang on in a lot of the discussions he's been doing recently, where he's just like, yeah, you know, this is one of those put my foot in my mouth moments. We talked about it, it didn't end up happening. But, you know, now you can see what we're working on, and we kind of had to test stuff out by putting the collections in the game earlier, by putting Carrion turning into luminescent armor into the game to see if it worked as kind of trials, and now we know the timing is perfect. We can do this with Heart of Thorns. And so I really liked that. I liked him, you know, just owning up to the fact that blog post was a bit of a disaster instead of just, you know, sweeping it under the bed. And now when people think about it, they hopefully won't be so negative. Moving on from the Precursor stream, I don't know how we ended up spending so long on that. There were a couple of streams I'm just going to mention happened, and that I think you guys should watch them for different reasons. I think you should watch the Quag and Deep Thoughts show, just because it was the most bizarre, odds, crazy spoof of a Saturday Night Live thing I think I've ever seen in my life. There was the 2 cooking shows with Jennifer Hale, where she made a variety of things that We had a bit of a discussion on the stream about today. You know, it could be kind of cringeworthy, but I love that kind of stuff. I love the enthusiasm. I thought it was really kind of funny and bizarre. And then lastly, just a really moving, awesome performance very early on with McLean, Dima, and company doing some different renditions of Heart of Thorns tracks and Guild Wars based tracks live for us on Twitch, and that was really fantastic as well. I really don't have anything to add on those, just that if you're interested in the sounds of them, check them out because, you know, there's not really newsy type stuff, but I think they are worthwhile knowing about. All right, moving on. There was a discussion about Heart of Thorns maps. Actually, a lot of the footage you'll be seeing in the background in this video will have come from that. It's new footage from Verdant Brink. No, this isn't one of the new maps. Verdant Brink, and it kind of shows off a lot more of the gliding stuff and areas of Verdant Brink we haven't seen thus far, as well as some discussion about designing of Heart of Thorns maps. These are the really key things that I took from it. They addressed head-on this discussion of why are there only 4 maps in Heart of Thorns. They gave their usual spiel to their answer that. They were like, oh, these maps are really big. You know, that's always been their answer. The maps are really big. That's why there's only 4. As you guys hopefully know by now, my main problem with it is because I feel like our rate of exploring the world, of getting to like the Crystal Desert and the Isles of Janthir and the Fire Island Chain and even other continents like Alona and Cantha suddenly feels like it's not going to happen for like 20, 30 years because basically we wait 3 years to get Ratasum's backyard. But it is true that these maps look so brilliantly expansive. Just look at this footage of how much stuff there is that you're gliding around here. And it's funny, actually, earlier in the week, I talked to you guys on a video about lore, where we were talking about one of the locations in Ore called the Gilded Forest. And I specifically mentioned, you know, the in-game representation of Tyria is so much smaller than how it's supposed to be in lore. You know, it's called the Gilded Forest, and we can walk through it in a matter of like 6-7 seconds. But really, in lore, this could have been a giant forest, right? And, well, one thing to the credit of the devs, you know, only adding 4 maps and making them huge ones, the jungle is genuinely going to give you a really good, almost true-scale perspective, hopefully, of how enormous this region of the world is. And that I do very much appreciate. Well, yeah, saw some hints of some future stuff, but really nothing super enlightening. Like the fact there are these hot air balloons that are going to be hovering around. We heard a bit more about ley line gliding, and you guys can see the footage. Let it speak for yourself. And actually, the most important thing that came from this, to me, and I really think this should get more attention because I cannot believe the only time this has been mentioned is in a little comment from Mike Z. Mike said that there will be new world bosses in the expansion. That kind of goes without saying. I think many of us were expecting that. But he actually said that these are more in line with the evolved jungle worm and Tequatl. So these were big events that were very hardcore, very difficult, targeted a very specific audience. Some of my favorite content that has ever gone in Guild Wars 2. And if you think about, for example, after the first year of Guild Wars 2's release, right? Tequatl, that kind of content, that was everything. That was all that ArenaNet had to show us at the first PAX after the release of the game came out. They flew map visual out specifically to PAX so that they could talk about this, right? It was a huge deal. And then we had the Evolved Jungle Worm later, and they seemed to drop it. They seemed to move away from it. I thought it wasn't going to be coming back. But Mike said that, you know, these bosses are going to be coming in. And he didn't say Vinewrath. He didn't say, oh, there's going to be bosses like Vinewrath, which is what I was expecting for Verdant Brink. He didn't say bosses like the Shadow Behemoth or Tyder Covington or any of these other face roll things they've got. He mentioned those specifically. Ones you have to focus on, ones you need coordinated groups to deal with. Now, whether he means current balance of those bosses, in which case they are kind of face roll because people understand them better and they really don't take too much coordination anymore, or whether he means original balance where they were truly epic and it was very exciting to see someone take one of them down, I don't know. Hopefully it's the latter, and hopefully we'll have some really fantastic situations where Heart of Thorns comes out. Everyone's wrapped up in the billion things to do, and then like 2 weeks after it's out, everyone's like, wait, hold on, has anyone actually seen this boss be killed yet? And everyone's like, no, actually. And all of a sudden you get these guilds rallying up to try and kill it. That's an exciting thought to me. Probably won't happen, but hey, I can dream, right? Moving on, we had an interview with Leah Hoyer, who is kind of head of narrative over at ArenaNet right now, talking about the story direction for Guild Wars 2 Heart of Thorns. Mostly it was kind of whimsy, non-information in my opinion. I talked about this on the stream today. I liked what Leah was saying, but she didn't really ever give any examples. She'd say something to the effect of, oh yeah, we'll be making something about the story, and someone from another department would have made something else, and it's like, oh, these two concepts can marry really well, so we end up putting in the game. And that kind of stuff's really exciting as a developer. She'd say something like that. I'm paraphrasing, of course. But, you know, that to me, yes, that's exciting to hear, but hearing actual examples, I think would have made this a much more exciting section. That said, I do think there was value in it. I'm talking about the stream a lot today. If you've watched a lot of the stream, you'll know what I'm like over there. We're playing a lot of personal story. I have such high hopes and can see the bar and the beautiful, wonderful heights that Guild Wars 2's personal story could be at. And I get very pessimistic and sad and upset when I see that really it doesn't reach that. So, you know, if you watch me over there, I'm salty and I play into it a bit. I'm grumpy. I'm basically rude, though, about this thing that these devs have created and someone at some point had a lot of passion for. And it's kind of cool to be able to sit there, see an interview, see the real faces and think, you know, maybe rein it in a little bit. You know, you get that little bit of grounding. Lastly, this section did have a very interesting tidbit. Again, there was an actual example given here that I was really happy to hear. And Leo was specifically talking about how when we currently look at Guild Wars 2's story, both personal story and living world, we kind of think of it as always being chunked up. You know, personal story, you got your every 10 levels chunk. And that 10 levels chunk is constrained story-wise by so many things. It has to have a certain number of choices designed into it. It has to have a certain amount of combat in every single little instance. It has to have some kind of a setup and then a conclusion at the end of the level 10 stuff. It has to kind of exist independently from the other level 10 bits because people might have chosen other options. And then we have another one and another one. You know, that cripples the story. Even for Living World Season 2, where it does feel a lot more cohesive, we still have these little chunks. And why do we have chunks now? Well, it's because each update was a little chunk, and each update needed to have, you know, hit these various criteria. And what that meant was they could have had a cool story, but then it gets constrained in a lot of ways because of these little chunks. And kind of what Leo was saying is, one thing they can do with the expansion, because they've changed the way that choices work, presumably, is they're not trying to constrain themselves in that way with the Heart of Thorn story. The Heart of Thorn story is just the story, and it is a dynamic, and it will go where it needs to go, and the pacing will be how the pacing should be for the story, and they're kind of working outside of that, and that was really thrilling for me to hear. I can't wait to see that be realized. That fills me with a hell of a lot of hope. Second to last of the very important ones that I want to talk about today, guys, was the skill balance show they did, where basically they previewed some skill balance stuff that we'll get the full details on in just a short while. So you can expect a dedicated video on this. This is going to be a skill balance patch in the same vein as the one where, you know, we had the elite specializations dropped in and so much change. It sounds like there is a lot of things happening. Specifically, you'll remember on the Druid stream where they were talking about that elite specialization, they noted that there were a lot of other changes coming to Ranger, and like Ranger pets were having like condition damage added onto them and so forth. But that's not the only class that's getting changes. They're all getting big changes. So for example, Necromancer, people will tell you, oh, Necromancer doesn't see running in dungeons and stuff because it doesn't do enough damage. You're wrong. Necromancer doesn't see much running because it doesn't provide too much utility. Do you want some utility? Well, Corrosive Poison Cloud now serves as projectile deflection. That is badass, and that is super useful. I did have a message from someone basically saying, oh, I'm disappointed that rather than making Necromancer useful by playing into its current niches, they're instead making it useful by giving it, you know, a projectile deflection, which other classes kind of haven't been known for. Well, though I kind of see what you're saying with that, you have to remember, even once Heart of Thorns comes out, let's assume everything in Heart of Thorns applies tons of conditions to you, which we know it doesn't, by the way, and has tons of boons on it, which we know they don't also, right? Let's assume, though, that everything does, all in Heart of Thorns. That still doesn't address a Necromancer's lack of viability in existing areas of the game. So kind of going a little bit in both measures, I think, is absolutely what they should be doing. That's great. And, you know, they demonstrated some other changes with, like, Necromancer Scepter. The 3 is no longer more about flat damage, but it's also about condi damage, and it stacks a ton of torment up there, and so on. But yes, specifics later in the week. Here's the most important thing.
Elementalists. Ice Bow. 50% damage nerf. It now affects 3 targets per hit. Enjoy.
Yeah, a 50% damage reduction. There was a funny, like, Thug Life that came out about this. And this is something that I absolutely agree with. I think that Icebow has been seeing too much use for too long in PvE. For PvP, I think it was pretty much in an okay place, to be honest. You could score, like, the odd cheesy kill, but the amount of counters to that now are perfectly acceptable. Yeah, it's getting a nerf. This should hopefully open up some more room for other classes to see places. I don't think this knocks Elementalist out of the meta at all. I think it will survive just fine. And in the end, Icebow was never doing what it's supposed to do. It's a healing power, condition duration, stat boosting, water-themed weapon. Why was it giving us so much DPS? It shouldn't have been. This is just the first of hopefully many changes to conjure weapons that makes them work as intended, shall we say. Another big change for Ellie was they're trying to nerf DD, but the way they're trying to do it is through burn damage, which is laughable to me, actually very disappointing to me. I feel like with the changes they've made, all they're really doing is nerfing the alternative playstyles that people would choose instead of DD. But they did mention like a scepter buff, so we'll see. I'll just give you guys the full details on that video. All right, last of all, let's talk a little bit about raiding. Not just raiding, but squad UI too. So there was a whole section about squad UI. Being a commander now means more. You get more tools, and specifically, you get this phenomenal UI. This is so cool, guys. The best UI. I cannot believe my life. I'm in a place where more user interface being added to a friggin' MMO makes me so happy. But this is brilliant, and of course, squads will be how we raid. You don't get like a 10-man party. You go in a squad. And for this reason, by the way, you'll be able to now squad without being a commander. And this is to facilitate people going to raids. It's just, you know, you won't get the pin and you won't get some of the more advanced features. So you don't need the 300 gold to raid, just to be clear. But so, big stuff about raiding. Number one, raiding is available in the next beta weekend event. Yeah, much closer than I was expecting. I'm really, really looking forward to see what people do. I wonder, though, if raids are too easy, which is obviously the question mainly on my mind, or if they're encouraging really boring or uninteresting gameplay, or they're just super bugged or whatever. I wonder whether, you know, people clearing them in the beta weekend event means anything. I wonder how much change we'll see on that first wing for when Hearthorns actually releases. There was also some other interesting notes. The idea that they could have somewhere around 6 wings a year. Do not take that as gospel. That was just spitballing from a dev. But yeah, around 6 wings a year is theoretically possible. That's really interesting. Now, that doesn't mean that you're going to get one raid that has 6 wings. You know, that could be 2 different 3-wing raids coming out that year. They could do it like that. But they even described, you know, they could just drop a random wing, basically like a raid that encompasses a single wing, you know, in just anywhere in the world. You know, they could just have a random area of the world where they're like, we got a really cool story we want to tell here. Let's make this some badass hardcore content here. Single wing independently goes into the game somewhere like that. A little bit, I guess, like maybe how they once imagined they'd add extra dungeon paths into the game. So that was described, and further was the way that we kind of progressed through these. Most of the stream, unfortunately, once again, only discussed stuff like rewards and how they want it to be difficult instead of actually talking about how it is difficult or how it will incentivize stuff like the druid and things to be played, which again disappoints me. But we did hear some nice things, like for example, legendary armor is only going to take for each piece 1/6 of the effort for a legendary weapon. So that means basically a full set of legendary armor, monetarily at least, because this will be tied to raids, and if you can't do the raids, if you're too casual for the raids, you won't be able to get it, right? But monetarily at least, and just in terms of sheer grind/effort, right? A full set of legendary armor is about the same as a single legendary weapon, which means anyone with an eternity basically has 2 sets of legendary armor. I really don't know where I stand on this. I think it sounded way more epic if a single piece of legendary armor was the effort of a legendary weapon. Maybe I'm just sort of in that more skewed demographic, though. I guess a lot more casual players are excited about this idea, but when was this aimed at casual people in the first place? You know, what I don't like the sound of, okay, and I get the accessibility idea here. I just don't like the idea of basically having a full set of legendary armor equivalent to, like, getting the minstrel, alright? It's not hard to get something like the minstrel, a legendary weapon. I don't like the idea of basically just having to get 3 minstrels worth of effort, alright? And then I've got my legendary heavy set, my legendary medium set, my legendary light set, and now I wait 3 years for the next expansion, and I will never ever give a damn about a single other bit of ascended armor that drops for me, because I have legendary armor and I can swap the stats whenever the damn hell I like, and all of that stuff is no longer interesting loot to me. Neither is it interesting an idea when a new raid comes out and there's more chances to get legendary armor stuff, because I already have all of it. Neither do I like the idea that I will only ever care about future legendary armor after that point, based on the way it looks, and if I don't happen to like the way it looks, then that's an entire expansion from the releases, and I feel less incentive to, you know, work on that stuff because it doesn't look that good in the first place. So I don't know, I think it's just a little bit too easy. Maybe that's only me, and we can have a little bit of discussion in there down below. But there you go, guys, that's my big TwitchCon roundup. Thank you very much for watching. There will be some things I've missed. If this is what really stood out to me over all of these hours, I think ArenaNet really did incredible on this one. This is some of the biggest, like, presence we directly, the consumers, have had from them going to a con ever. You know, I doubtless they put tons of work in whenever they go to a con, and this might not have felt very different to them, but in terms of the actual new stuff that we got, those of us sitting at home and not going to ourselves, is through the roof, and that has been absolutely awesome. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I hope you're having a great weekend, and I'll see you next time.